What's going on, man? Welcome back to the basement. I'm Ron, and today we have my top 36 wide receivers for Week 3 of fantasy football to make sure you guys are ready to go to lock in your lineups for this week. Now, we have a ton of players to get into, so let's not waste any time. If you enjoy, make sure down below, subscribe, leave a like. Let's go. All right, so a couple of things here. We're going to do this the good old-fashioned way. We got a tier list here. This is going to be for PPR leagues, but you can use it for half PPR league standard. It's going to be a little bit tough, but it happens. That's the least played of the formats, I guess you could call it. And it's a tier list. We have them tiered up here. I'm much more firm on the tier separations than I am player X versus player B right next to each other within each tier. Now, we also have the must-starts. My top 12 wide receivers are all right here. You have Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Diggs, CeeDee Lamb, Davante Adams, Jamar Chase. If Joe Burrow plays Jamar Chase, you're starting him. I know it's been frustrating, but if he plays, you're starting Jamar Chase. Keenan Allen, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, DeVonta Smith, Calvin Ridley, Chris Olave. Those are, to me, my top 12 wide receivers that are must-starts. If you have them, they need to be in your lineup. Now, the two tiers of must-start 1 through 6, must-start 7 through 12, it's just 6 and 6. It's not tiered just yet there. Now, also, before we get into this first tier, if you want access to the complete full rankings, I think I rank like 65 wide receivers every week. That'll be on the Patreon, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You get that, my waiver wire article every week, my rest of season rankings every week. You get my start-sit stream every Sunday. So it's a bunch of stuff there, patreon.com/Ron Stewart. You can find that link in the description and the comment section down below. But here we go. We have our wide receiver 13 here, right? So 12 are already off the board. And we have in our Fringe wide receiver 1s tier, which just pretty much means at this point, they're going into your lineup if you have them, but maybe you're in a shallower league, like a 10-man, 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, and things are a little bit dicey where you have a lot of really nice options where maybe you drafted well, you have wide receivers through the flex plus another, and then you have this guy off of waivers. You have Puka Nacua, man. Dude, if you told me 3 weeks ago that I would be ranking Puka Nacua 5th rounder on the Rams as my wide receiver 13 in week 3, like it truly is wild, but it just kind of is the beauty of football. We have this all the time where players just pop up out of nowhere, and you have to ride the hot hand with Puka Nacua. Like it's truly insane. He's going to be on the road versus the Bengals on Monday night, and at this point, you can't really sit him unless you have the must starts above. You can go with them, but if not, Puka Nacua has to be in your lineup. He has 26 points per game behind just Tyreek Hill. He has the most targets in the NFL. He has more fantasy points per game than Justin Jefferson through 2 weeks here, and the Rams are passing at the 7th highest rate here. Now, I'm going to keep flashing these sort of charts here. This is Hayden Winks, where you can see neutral pass rate. So that's pass rate in close games, no garbage time. It's at least close. And the Rams have been passing the ball a ton. The offense has looked good. Stafford has been great. It's a neutral matchup versus Bengals defense. They're not too good, not too bad. You would hope that Joe Burrow is healthy. That's kind of the big storyline of this week is he has a calf issue. It's looking like it's a little bit positive at this point in the week, but it is still early as well. You'd hope for him to be there, but even if Burrow can't be there and make it a competitive game, Puka Nacua, still fire him up. Again, I truly am. Like, one of the craziest parts of the season has been the Puka Nacua thing. I'm happy for him, but it's been one of the more shocking things of this season so far. Next up, wide receiver 14, we have Jaylen Waddle. He is going to be at home versus Denver. The Miami Dolphins are projected for 27.5 points this week. That is the 3rd most in the entire NFL. That's their implied team total. You take Vegas odds, right? They have like a over-under and they have a spread. You can pretty much imply how much Vegas thinks each team is going to score based on those numbers. They think that the Dolphins will score 27.5 points this week. They're 6.5-point favorites. And when it comes to Waddle, it's very simple. It is very simple. He hasn't been great so far, where he hasn't really given you anything crazy, but that's because week 1 was quiet. Week 2, he gets a concussion. And that's kind of the big story with Waddle. It really just comes down to this. He's a 50-50 shot to play in week 3. This is a tweet from Edwin Porras here. 50% chance to play week 3 based on data, 10% recurrence rate if active. So 10% is pretty negligible. He's dealing with a concussion. We won't really know if he's going to play until later in the week, like probably Friday, Saturday. it comes down to this. If he plays, you play him. If he doesn't play, you don't play him. That's literally all it comes down to. This Broncos matchup is really nice too. Miami, 5th highest neutral pass rate. You also have Miami leading the league in passing yards. You have the Broncos allowing the 6th most explosive plays in the NFL. We're bringing charts today, fellas. We have the explosive play rate. This is from Sam Hoppen. Shout out to Sam Hoppen. He does great work. You can see the Broncos are allowing the 6th most explosive plays. What do the Dolphins do the best? Explosive plays, Waddle, Tyreek, big plays all over the place. This could be a really nice bounce back spot for Waddle if he's ready to go. Now, our wide receiver 15 is Deebo Samuel. He is at home versus the Giants as a 10-point favorite. Thursday Night Football. It seems like Vegas thinks that the 49ers are going to absolutely crush the Giants, and they're not all that wrong in that assessment, just with how amazing the 49ers have looked. Giants barely squeaked out a win versus the Cardinals last week, and I absolutely love Deebo at home here. You have McCaffrey, who just played 100% of the snaps on Sunday. Short turnaround here. I think Elijah Mitchell will be involved as well, but the big thing here is that Aiyuk is a true game-time decision. He is a true game-time decision with a shoulder injury. He played like half of the snaps last week. Short turnaround on Thursday Night Football. I really don't think, I don't think that he does play Brandon Aiyuk, and if he does play, I think that it's more of a decoy role where they're 10-point favorites. They don't need to run Aiyuk out there and heavily feature him or anything. So for now, Deebo gets a huge boost to me because this is an offense that runs through Deebo, runs through McCaffrey. Again, I think McCaffrey's going to get his touches not pulled here, but I think they're not going to want to play him 100% of the snaps in a game versus the Giants on Thursday night. And Deebo Samuel, I think, is going to absolutely eat up this defense, where he had 9 targets and 5 carries last week. That's a lot. That'd be a lot of opportunities for a running back. That's 14 opportunities, 9 targets, 5 carries. He should be leaned on here, especially in the receiving game without Brandon Aiyuk fully healthy. And Deebo is this big play guy. The Giants have allowed the 4th most explosive plays in the NFL so far this season. I think Deebo gets loose, and I absolutely love. It's such a bummer that I don't have pick'ems available in New Jersey, but if I did, I would be hammering this Deebo projection here, where he's projected for 53.5 receiving yards on underdog. I love the higher here again. They're going to lean on him without Aiyuk. The Giants' pass defense isn't great. They're going to score a lot of points, and you can string that together with the higher 0.5 total yards on Daniel Jones. It's a nice little special that they do on the primetime games where you can kind of get one of those freebies in there where if you get 2 correct, you get 3 extra money. If you get 3 correct, you get 6 extra money. You can hop on there, have a fun little sweat for those primetime games. Make sure you check it out. Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code RON and they'll match your deposit up to $100. You can find a link in the description, comment section down below. Click it. It'll take you to Underdog Fantasy. You'll use my promo code RON. It'll match your deposit up to $100. So our next wide receiver here, wide receiver 16, is T. Higgins. And he is going to be the first wide receiver of this wide receiver 2's spot here, where these are just my less confident wide receiver 2 plays. These are all comfortable wide receiver 2s. I'm fine putting them in my lineup. But preferably when I look at the lineup, I would like one of these guys to be in the wide receiver 1 spot. It's kind of what it comes down to. Now, T. Higgins is going to be at home versus the Rams. We talked about Puka Nacua here. It really just comes down to Joe Burrow, right? T. Higgins is coming off of a massive game where he had 2 touchdowns. He was the wide receiver 4 on the week, and it would be wheels up in what could be a shootout matchup, Rams versus Bengals. None of the defenses or either of the defenses, neither of them are elite is what I'll say. But now we have the Joe Burrow calf injury. He re-aggravated at the end of last week's game. He is questionable for this week. It's a Monday night game as well. So that's when it's really spooky, where you're not going to really have a backup option for T. Higgins. So you have to kind of split the difference here and figure out where would you rank him knowing that Joe Burrow is a question mark. And this is where I land. I think that you could put him pretty much in this area if we knew Joe Burrow was going to play. But the issue is with Joe Burrow is even if he's going to play, he might not be himself, where there's a risk of re-aggravating the calf injury. There's a risk that he's 70% of what we usually get out of Joe Burrow. So for all those reasons, in a neutral matchup versus the LA Rams, I have T. Higgins as my wide receiver 16 here. It's tough to say much more without more information on how Joe Burrow is going to look come game day. Then we have wide receiver 17, Mike Williams, in pretty much the fantasy game of the week here in Minnesota, Chargers versus Minnesota, with the highest over-under of the week at 53.5, which is a massive over-under. Chargers versus Vikings. It should be fireworks here, where both teams are top 10 in pace of play. The Vikings' run defense looked awful versus the Eagles, but with no Eckler, I'd kind of be surprised if the Chargers went with a run-heavy offense like they did in week 1, where they had like 40 rush attempts. We'll see. Maybe that's the route they go, but Keenan Allen, Mike Williams in this matchup, and what could just be an absolute track race here, I think you have to fire up all of your Chargers, all of your Vikings. He's borderline fringe wide receiver territory, Mike Williams, and we'll just leave him here for now. I'm actually making the executive decision. If Burrow isn't playing, of course, you have Mike Williams over him, but I almost want to put Mike Williams ahead of T. Higgins, even if Burrow does play. But, I mean, T. Higgins coming off a big game, he should have volume regardless, so it's tough to move him or swap him there. Wide receiver 18, though. I don't know why I'm debating switching rankings that I've already made, but and by the way, I honestly, like, these are my first look rankings. I tweaked them. Like, these aren't the exact rankings that you find on the Patreon. These are like my first run through, and then Thursday mornings I go back through, tweak some things, and have like my official rankings that day. So just to get an idea, that's why the tiers are much more valuable than everything else here. But wide receiver 18, we have Mike Evans, who is going to be at home versus the Eagles as 5.5-point underdogs here. And I absolutely love the Tampa Bay wide receivers in this game. Mike Evans is currently wide receiver 4 in fantasy, and this is a game environment where at home versus the Eagles are, again, huge favorites, 5.5-point favorites. The Bucs are going to be playing from behind the entire game, and Rachaad White, yes, he was effective last week versus, I believe, the Bears, who the Bears defense isn't great at all, but Rachaad White over his entire career has been a pretty poor rusher, and you have a spot here where the Eagles have the 3rd best run defense according to EPA per play. Now, EPA per play, I find that on rbsdm.com. It's a stat, expected points added. It's just, what is your expected points on a given play? How much are you going above or below that, just in terms of contributing to the box score, contributing to winning football games. And it's just a way of having efficiency across the board measured for offense, defense, rush defense, pass defense. It's one of the more accurate ways to do it, instead of just doing raw yards, because it doesn't take into account garbage time and win percentages and all of that. So with the Eagles, they have the 3rd best run defense according to that. Rachaad White should be a non-factor. It should be a game where they're going to be playing from behind. And you have the Eagles, who have forced their opponents. I'm trying to think of who they played in week 1. I know it was the Vikings. I don't know why I can't think of the Eagles' week 1 matchup here, but it was the Vikings. But regardless, opponents of the Eagles so far have averaged 49 pass attempts per game, which is 2nd most in the NFL. I think the Bucs are going to have to pass the ball a ton. The Eagles' secondary is a little bit banged up. I think Mike Evans' little renaissance here is going to continue. Then we have wide receiver 19, Amari Cooper, who is at home versus the Titans as a 3-point favorite. He was a game-time decision this week. Amari Cooper, I thought he wasn't going to play. I had him super low in my rankings. And then he comes out here and looks, I wouldn't say fine, but he has 9 targets, 7 catches, 90 yards. Still that dude, still getting open. And you have a dream matchup here versus the Titans, where the Titans are a classic pass funnel, where they allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points to opposing running backs. The Browns just lost Nick Chubb, so they're not going to be thrilled to run the ball against that type of rush defense with Jeffrey Simmons up front. And then they allow the 3rd most points to opposing wide receivers, and they're at home. So we know what those Amari Cooper home-away splits are like, and we know what this Tennessee pass defense and run defense is like. It's just the perfect scenario for Amari Cooper. You could argue moving him up higher than this, but wide receiver 19 is where he'll be at for me. Then we have the pair of Seahawks wide receivers. They are in a pretty brutal matchup. They're going to be at home versus the Panthers, 5.5-point favorites. It's just up game script-wise, where this is a Panthers team that in EPA per play is a top 10 pass defense, bottom 5 rush defense. So they're a run funnel. They're the opposite of the Titans, where they're actually pretty good against the pass. I feel like J.C. Horn might have left that game early on Monday, but I'm not quite sure. I know that he's one of their better secondary guys, and you have Burns up front. But they're a poor rush defense. Like, I think Tony Jones got home against them with like 2 touchdowns on Monday Night Football. So you have a defense that is better against the pass than they are the run. You have a game script where the Seahawks are at home in a game that they should be winning. So it's just tough. The Panthers have allowed the 2nd most fantasy points to running backs, 3rd least to wide receivers. So you get a spot here where this is a lot more of a Kenneth Walker game than a DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett game. But when you have Geno Smith early in the game, he could let one rip, air it out. One of these guys could score a touchdown. It's just tough to move them further back than a back-end wide receiver 2 here. But I'm not crazy about starting either of them, is kind of what I'll say. Next up, we have wide receiver 22, a guy that I am crazy about starting, Michael Pittman Jr., man. Michael Pittman Jr., if there's people in your league that haven't figured out that Michael Pittman Jr. is a wide receiver 2 rest of the season, I think we're going to do a trade target video probably tomorrow morning, but pick up the phone. Get on the phone with the Michael Pittman owner, because I'm not sure people who have Michael Pittman are quite sure of what they have in Michael Pittman. I know that sounds pretty crazy, but he's going to be on the road versus the Ravens in Baltimore as a 7.5 point underdog, which is perfect because that means they're going to be coming from behind, and you have Michael Pittman, who is at this point a weekly wide receiver 2, the wide receiver 10 in points per game. He's tied for 4th among wide receivers with 21 targets, and this is a great offense where this is shocking to me. Like, we thought that this was going to be a run-heavy offense, and I know that we had 1 week of Anthony Richardson, but it's still a pretty pass-heavy offense, or it's about average in terms of pass heaviness, in terms of neutral pass rate, but I mean, they're fast is what I meant, where they have the 2nd highest neutral pace offense and the 12th most pass attempts. Now, their neutral pass rate is about league average, but because they're so no-huddle oriented and getting to the line and snapping the ball with a lot of seconds on the play clock, they're just having a lot of plays. And when you have a lot of plays in a game script where you're a 7.5 point underdog, you're going to have a lot of pass attempts. So it's just the perfect spot here. You have the Ravens defense as well that has allowed 42.5 pass attempts per game to opponents, which is the 3rd most in the NFL. They're going to play fast, this Colts team. They're going to be trailing. They're going to be playing just catch-up football the entire time. And this Ravens defense has allowed the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers over the past 2 weeks. I don't care if it's Minshew. I don't care if it's Anthony Richardson. I don't know if it's either of those two. Pittman, to me, fire him up as a really solid wide receiver 2 this week. Then we have our last wide receiver in this tier. Piggybacking on Mike Evans, you have wide receiver 23, Chris Godwin. Again, they're going to be at home versus the Eagles, 5.5 point dogs here. And it's a similar case as Evans, where it's a great environment, but the issue is that Godwin has been the odd man out here. He is 10.5 point per game as the wide receiver 48 right now. But again, this is a great spot, and even more so for Godwin than Mike Evans, where the interior of this Eagles defense, not the defensive line, of course, but the slot area, Avonte Maddox, their starting slot corner, is on IR. So I don't know who they're replacing him with, but it's going to be some dusty guy in the slot guarding Chris Godwin in a game where the Bucs are going to be passing the ball a ton. You have to assume in PPR leagues that Godwin gets home this week. I really like Godwin. If you've been starting him and you're like, man, I need more from Godwin, I really would try him out one more week in your lineup. Then we have our borderline wide receiver 2s. And these guys are fine starts. I feel sort of comfortable with as my wide receiver 2 for this week, but not comfortable enough that I would start him over any of these guys. And first up at wide receiver 24, we have George Pickens. Now, first thing I want to say is all of the things I said on my Sell These Players video, I'd like to apologize for. I did say sell George Pickens last week. I'll take that L. I'll hold it high. I'll hold it proudly. You guys know, if you've been around the channel for a while, go look up my wide receiver rankings video from the 2022 rookie wide receiver draft class. Pickens was like my wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6. I love this dude coming out. It's just this Matt Canada offense has been absolutely brutal for him, where they have just been using him down the field, running nothing but goes the entire time. Like, this has been his route tree his entire career, his entire rookie year so far. It's just been go routes. Like, it's just been, you can't be a viable fantasy wide receiver on that usage. Now, I should have been like, okay, Deontay Johnson's out. Maybe they'll now feature George Pickens in the shorter areas of the field instead of sort of making up for that with your Freiermuths and your running backs and your Allen Robinson and your Calvin Austin and still have Pickens in that role. It seems like they've sort of shifted from that and let Pickens become a true alpha wide receiver in this offense. And that's really, really exciting. Like, that is amazing, right? He's all around the formation. He's running routes that are shorter than like 30 yards downfield. You got some slants in there, some outs. It's just, it's perfect. Like, that is exactly what you want there. 10 targets. He had a 30% target share, 4 for 127 and a touchdown. Beautiful, beautiful stuff. This actually reminds me a lot of, now, of course, he doesn't have Russell Wilson throwing him the ball. So he doesn't quite have, I mean, DK Metcalf, you guys remember, DK Metcalf's second year was like a top 3 point per game wide receiver through like the first 10 weeks with Russell Wilson, and then they kind of slowed down towards the end of the season. But Pickens reminds me a lot of DK Metcalf in the way that Metcalf was used. If I pull up these exact passing charts for DK Metcalf, I'm debating doing it right now. So I actually got them. Look how similar this is, right? So you see, right-hand side, Pickens running nothing but go routes. Second side, he's doing his thing out there. Now, if we go and look at what DK Metcalf did, This is this is week 15 of his rookie year here. Week 15 of his rookie year, you can see, I mean, it is really, really bad. I mean, can we zoom out a little bit here for you guys? But my goodness, I mean, that's the most barren routes ever. Now, that's his rookie year. It says somewhere, 2019, week 15, and then we go to 2020. So this is year 2 in just versus Minnesota. Way more elaborate route tree. It looks very similar to Pickens. So I just thought that was an interesting parallel there of just kind of players that have an undeveloped route tree early on and then sort of get the keys later. Now, if this sticks with Diontae Johnson, I'm not quite sure, but you should be very excited about George Pickens. Now, George Pickens gets a light matchup here in Las Vegas against the Raiders as 2.5-point underdogs, which is kind of surprising here. But this defense is bottom 5 in EPA per play across the board and has allowed the 11th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. George Pickens you can fire up as pretty much a wide receiver 2, a fringe wide receiver 2, until Diontae Johnson's back or until Pickens' route tree goes back to being very basic and vanilla. Now, our next wide receiver 25, Zay Flowers. He's going to be at home versus the Colts, the other side of that Michael Pittman game we just talked about. He's coming off a quieter week, 4 catches for 62 yards. They're 7.5-point favorites at home. But here's the issue. They're not going to really be able to, 7.5-point favorites, okay, maybe they should be in a leading game script where they're going to be handing the ball off a ton. But the issue is that Justice Hill, up in the air right now, I think he has a toe injury. And your running backs right now are Gus Edwards, Melvin Gordon, Kenyon Drake. You can't have a successful run game there. Now, of course, I like Lamar Jackson to have 80-plus rushing yards in this game. I think that he's going to have a terrific day on the ground. But this is a team in the Colts that is top 10 in run defense and one of the worst wide receiver defenses in the league, where they are allowing the second most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers in general. And the key part is here, they're allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers out of the slot. That's a stat from the 33rd team. They're allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers out of the slot. Who leads the Ravens in slot snaps? Zay Flowers. So a guy who has been featured this entire time. They actually just let up Tank Dell, 7 catches, 72 yards, and a touchdown there. So if Tank Dell can go off against the Colts, I think so can Zay Flowers. I know that it was a quieter week after a really intriguing week 1. I wouldn't panic just yet with Zay Flowers. Then we have Garrett Wilson here at home versus the Patriots, 2.5-point favorites. Wilson right now is the wide receiver 21 in fantasy on the wide receiver 39 expected points per game. Expected points per game is just volume based on your targets, your ADOT, your red zone targets. I mean, Garrett Wilson's good enough to outproduce his volume, but it's going to bite him soon. He has 2 lucky touchdowns, and the Patriots are sort of known for giving young quarterbacks fits. Sadly, I'm a Jets fan. I remember the Sam Darnold seeing goats thing vividly. I know that Zach Wilson's going to be an absolute shit show in front of this defense. And then you have the Pats secondary that's sort of banged up. The Pats pass rush is really good, where they have Judon. I believe the kid Keon White looks pretty decent the first couple weeks. This offense is going to really struggle. It's going to be a struggle all around, but wide receiver 26 with Garrett Wilson is about as low as I can put him. And this is also a banged-up wide receiver room. I believe Jack Jones, one of their better corners. By the way, fellas, I'm not a savant with the defenses. If I got that wrong, let me know. But Jack Jones, I think, is hurt at corner for them. And they have Christian Gonzalez, who's a rookie. So I know Christian Gonzalez has looked really good, but unless he's Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson should be able to handle a rookie corner. So we'll see how that goes. I treat him again as like a fringy wide receiver 2, Garrett Wilson, this week. And then our last wide receiver here that I'm kind of just putting here to save face, to be honest with you, is Brandon Aiyuk at home versus the Giants. We outlined it with Deebo. It really just comes down to health for him. He's been off to such a red-hot start that I don't know if you can really put him much lower than this. Maybe I will put him lower than this, Brandon Aiyuk. But if he does play, the Giants are such a bad matchup, or a good fantasy matchup for Aiyuk. They're such a bad defense that Aiyuk can get home with 3 catches. It feels like if Aiyuk plays, he'll be a decoy, but he's also not going to play just to run empty routes, if that makes sense. I could see a world where he has one big play against these Giants in a game where the 49ers are supposed to absolutely crush these guys, and he ends up being a good start. So a guy who's usually a top 20 wide receiver in a given week, wide receiver 27 feels pretty sensible, with the understanding that he plays this week and plays through his shoulder injury. If he doesn't, then of course you're sitting him. And if he doesn't play, Deebo gets a boost, Kittle gets a big boost as well. Now, after that, we have our wide receiver 3s and flex plays here. First up, we have Jordan Addison. and I absolutely love him this week. This is going to be a lot higher than you see him on sites, other people's rankings, but he is my wide receiver 28 this week. He is on the road in LA as a 1.5 point underdog here. 1.5 point favorite on the road. The Vikings are supposed to win this game. I'm screwing up all over the place. They're at home in the Dome in Minnesota, which is really exciting. They're at home in Minnesota as 1.5 point favorites here. And I absolutely love Addison, where his route percentage continues to climb. He continues to get fed more over KJ Osborne. He's the wide receiver 18 in points per game, and everything is set up perfectly here, where Jordan Addison has 2 big explosive touchdowns so far. Who gives up the most explosive touchdowns in the league, or the most explosive plays in the league? The Chargers, by a lot as well, by a lot. So I love it. Highest over-under as well in this game. It's supposed to be a high-scoring track meet shootout here. On top of that, you have the Chargers, who are dead last in pass defense and have a top 12 run defense per EPA per play. And then you also have the Vikings that pass the ball at the league's highest rate. Like, everything just comes together. Chargers allow the most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers as well. Just like every single green flag you could possibly want is here. Most of the attention is going to be devoted to Justin Jefferson. If this game does shoot out, it becomes a track meet. Addison is an absolute smash play here to put in your flex. After that, at wide receiver 29, we have Jerry Jeudy, who's going to go on the road playing Miami as a 6.5 point underdog. It's a neutral matchup. As an underdog, they shouldn't have to pass the ball here. And I like Jerry Jeudy to kind of get back on track. He looked okay. This is from Dwayne McFarland. He had an 86% route participation last week, 19% target share. Nothing really came of it, but because the Broncos don't really have anything that they're throwing to, like they're giving meaningful targets to guys like Brandon Johnson, Jeudy should be able to be startable this week, assuming he's 100%. And I'd assume he sort of played a little bit of last week, got back to game speed. Now we should sort of be hitting our stride here against Miami in what could be not a shootout, but they're 6.5 point underdogs on the road. They should have to pass the ball a bunch. Jerry Jeudy is a guy who could be really good this week for fantasy. Then we have my wide receiver 30, Drake London. And Drake London is one of my starts of the week here. He is going on the road in Detroit, in Detroit's dome as a 3-point underdog. And I think you can start London this week with confidence. He had 6 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown last week. And I love this environment where they're going to go on the road as road underdogs. And the Falcons are going to have to pass more than they would like to. Detroit is forcing opposing teams to pass the ball 40 times per game. That is tied for 4th in the NFL. And Detroit is also allowing the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. So I love Drake London in a matchup where they should have to pass the ball against a soft secondary in what should be, Detroit's dome just promotes shootouts. We've been seeing that. They're going to have to score points to keep up with Jared Goff in this offense. So I do like Drake London this week. He also has a projection of 52.5 receiving yards that I think is just straight up disrespectful on the underdog pick'em. Again, promo code RON will get you a deposit match up to $100 on Underdog Fantasy. You just go to the Pick'em tab, and you can find them right there. I love the higher than 52.5 number. He has gone higher than 52.5 receiving yards in 5 of his last 7 games. I don't know why I paused like that, but 5 of his last 7 games, he's gone higher than 52.5 receiving yards. That is way too low of a line in this game environment. I absolutely love it. That'll get you to 6x your Pick'em. Now, after that, we have our wide receiver 31. We have Michael Thomas here. Michael Thomas is sort of getting slept on. He's going to be in Green Bay. Jordan Love has shown that he can kind of play here. They're 2-point underdogs. They should have to sort of keep up with this. Green Bay offense has kind of been good here. And Michael Thomas is a guy who was tied for 13th most targets with 17 targets through 2 games here. He is wide receiver 15 in PFF's expected points per game. He's this target hog. He's in a neutral matchup on the road. I think Michael Thomas is a guy you can start trusting as a wide receiver 3 moving forward. After that, we have wide receiver 32, DeAndre Hopkins. He's going on the road versus Cleveland as 3-point dogs. Here's the issue with Hopkins. You drafted him in the top 4 rounds. It probably sucks to see him as like a flex play here, but the issue with Hopkins, he only ran 21 routes last week. That's about 2/3 of the routes. Hopkins' usual number is like 90% plus. Now, that was because he didn't practice all week and he was playing hurt. What I would say is just monitor DeAndre Hopkins this week. If he's not practicing the entire week and he's not right, then it's going to be a tough start this week. It's also going to be a tough start because this Browns defense is very much a thing. Where this Browns defense, this is EPA per dropback and EPA per rush attempt. Pretty much just showing your rush defense and your pass defense according to EPA. And the only team that is in that truly elite upper right area is the Cowboys and the Browns. The only defense that has been able to even hold a candle to the Cowboys defense this year has been the Browns. Myles Garrett is on a different level right now, and this is just a tough overall matchup. Now, it's tough to put Hopkins much lower than this, right? Hopkins has a 30% plus target share this year. He's the wide receiver 29 in expected points per game. He is the wide receiver 45 in points per game, though. So the volume has been there. You can project him for a good amount of volume, but in this matchup with the injury, it's tough to put him much higher than right there. Then we have Nico Collins, wide receiver 33. I think he was in our must-draft wide receiver breakouts video, Nico Collins. He's going on the road versus the Jaguars as a 9.5-point underdog. He is currently the wide receiver 6 in points per game. He is the wide receiver 6 in expected points per game. So he's just been a monster all around. He's commanding targets. He's, doing good on those targets as well. And he's just been an absolute monster. He's approaching like every week wide receiver 2 status. I debated putting him up much higher than this, but I wanted to sort of scale it back ever so slightly. But he's a dog. And this is, again, a game versus the Jaguars on the road as 9.5-point dogs. This is going to be another C.J. Stroud having to pass the ball for over 250-plus passing yards here. And the Jaguars' defense is also one where if we look at that, if we look at this again, you have the Jaguars towards the upper part, which the higher up you are, the better rush defense you are. The more you are to the right, the better your pass defense is. So the Jaguars have a super elite run defense. The Texans' offensive line's been struggling. The Texans are not going to be running the ball at all in this game, so they're going to have to pass the ball. And Nico Collins is the main beneficiary of this catch-up style football that they're going to have to play. Now, our next wide receiver, catch-up style football, they playing at Heinz Field. Got him. All right, here we go. DJ Moore, wide receiver. I'll be here all day, fellas. I'll be here all day. Wide receiver 34. We have DJ Moore on the road versus KC. A spread of 12.5. 12.5-point underdogs. You have DJ Moore as my wide receiver 34, coming off 16.4 PPR points. He had 7 targets, 6 catches, 104 yards. You would hope that I would put him higher than wide receiver 34, but it's just so hard to trust this offense. I mean, he was a complete zero in week 1. This Bears offense has looked awful, and even though they're going to have to pass the ball in a trailing game script versus Kansas City, just like on the road versus Chris Jones on the defensive line, I'm just not sure if this game's even going to be competitive. Like, that's really my biggest concern here. I don't know if this is going to be a competitive game. Like, I don't know who the Bears' backup quarterback is, but it wouldn't shock me if he finished out the last couple drives. Like, I think it could just get really, really ugly. And even in a trailing game script where Fields has to pass the ball a bunch, I don't know if they're going to sustain drives. This is a pretty good defense. I don't think Chris Jones is really going to have much of an issue with this offensive line. Justin Fields' biggest issue recently has been giving up sacks. And I think if this offense does anything in this game, I think it's going to be running the ball, where you have Justin Fields actually having designed rushes and read options and stuff. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to beat the Chiefs on the back of DJ Moore, but I'll happily be wrong about that assessment. Now, our last two wide receivers, wide receiver 35 and wide receiver 36, we have Terry McLaurin and we have Jahan Dotson. They're at home versus Buffalo. Now, I know this is a low ranking, but these are both wide receivers that have been outside the top 40 wide receivers in PPR points so far, but I actually kind of like their matchup this week. As much as it's like, oh, well, how come they're not higher? It's just like it's tough to rank them higher among other good players. Like, all these guys are good NFL players, But this is a good matchup where the Bills have allowed, if we look back at that explosive play chart, they've allowed the third highest explosive play rate. And we have Terry McLaurin, who's a downfield monster. We have Jahan Dotson, who showed in the preseason a little bit of a downfield monster as well. And you have a offense here that has the 8th highest neutral pass rate, which is really exciting for a Washington team that has been run heavy and boring as of lately. And you have Sam Howell, who is one of only 11 quarterbacks with 500 or more passing yards in the NFL. So Sam Howell's looked good. This is a team that's passed the ball a ton. Really what the issue has been is that the guys who have gotten home have been, or not gotten home, but the guy who has been taking a lot of the targets has been Logan Thomas. He has 10 targets, which is the same amount of targets as Terry McLaurin, and it's just one less than Jahan Dotson. He's dealing with a concussion. He might not play. If he doesn't play, then you can move McLaurin and Jahan Dotson to like the front of this tier as nice wide receiver 3 flex plays. I think that they're both boom busts against this Bills defense, but One of them is going to come down with a deep ball and be really good for fantasy this week. Now, that's going to do it for us today. You can kind of take a mental screenshot, or you can actually just take a screenshot of the rankings this week. Make sure you guys get your lineups ready for Thursday. I'll also say, I know that people have been complaining they want names on these. I think as soon as the running back video, we'll have that on Friday, I might have names in them. We're going to do a little bit of an upgrade to how these videos go. And I also know we didn't do a tier list last week. Just got caught up with some things. We're going to have them back. I'm going to make sure that we have trade targets covered every week on top of like waivers, lessons learned. You guys know me when it comes to in-season stuff. I'm all over the place. But just know, I'll be posting for you guys on the channel. As always, subscribe, leave a like. And also, again, if you want access to the complete rankings, that'll be on patreon.com/RonStewart in the description and the comment section down below. But if you can't support there, just leaving a like and subscribing, maybe even commenting something you disagree with me on, will also help us out in the algorithm. But of course, I will see you guys in the next one.
Stones, like this froze, ice cold, ice around my body like I'm